Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the time. My name is Keegan Lueders and I'm really excited to be presenting this session along with my friend and colleague Sarah Stokes. We're going to be talking about a feedback culture in product and design teams. And a lot of what we're going to be doing is a little bit of stuff that we presented at a previous conference, but also mainly what we've actually done at Sarah's company, at Domain Property Group, and sharing our experience of how feedback can be utilised in product and design teams.
Now, the good thing about feedback is that it fosters a culture of innovation, and hello, by the way. It fosters a growth mindset and opens communication channels. But the problem with feedback is that it's got a brand problem. It is a bit tricky and can be perceived negatively. So what we're looking to do today is turn that around and make it a fuel for your organization to do better.
So the things that we'll be talking about are defining what feedback is, why it's important, and how we might be able to support a culture of that feedback. And here's who we are. Here's how we go back. We go back a few years. We did our Masters of Business Coaching together. That's me in the middle and Sarah off to the right of screen. And one of the things that we learned through our Masters of Business Coaching is not only the theory, but the experience of what feedback can do and how to create a feedback culture, and the value of it and how to start to sort of utilize that. And the other thing that's probably important to know is that we've really taken a coaching lens. Feedback is a huge part of coaching, but also a coaching lens is brought to this this presentation and how we have explored feedback in product and design teams.
Part of what we learned when we were on our coaching course together was how to give and receive feedback when we were critiquing each other's coaching style. So one person would be coaching, the other person would be listening, and one person would be coached. And that was a great way to flex our giving and receiving feedback muscles. And we learned a lot on the job, which is what we'll bring to today. When we think about feedback in the context of design, we think about critique. And if you Google feedback in design, critique is mainly what comes up. But critique is the tip of the iceberg. There's so many other opportunities to give and receive feedback, such as when you're running research, is the research brief correct? How are you reporting out the findings? How are you managing your stakeholders? How are you communicating, working in triads, and so on? So feedback is everywhere. It's not just in critique, it's part of the culture.
So on the back of that thinking that feedback was broader than just the critique for design teams, we thought, well, how might we support a feedback culture in an organisation? As I mentioned, we went to Domain Property Group and got some volunteers, some ready and willing volunteers, and we had a small group of 8 design and delivery leaders, and we ran 3 interactive sessions of 90 minutes each, all delivered over Zoom, about a fortnight apart. And we asked people to explore it and then go and apply some of these principles and come and report back. And so we had a series of 3 workshops where there was a lot of interaction between the participants and a lot of them going away and applying and putting this into practice.
So we wanted to understand what people wanted to get out of the program, where they were at with feedback in general. So we asked them this question that you can see on the screen. And as you can see, there's a variety of responses. People want more than tools. They want best practice. They want to understand how to give and receive in different situations, not just with direct reports. They want to make feedback less weird, and they want to make it more of a relationship. And so that's what we sought to do in the case study.
I think that's a really interesting thing to pick up on here, that so many feedback training programs think so much about the technical skills and specifically how to deliver feedback, but it's bigger than that. And this is what, without prompting, this is what the participants asked for. It was more than just how they give feedback, but how do they create that whole environment that they're in? How do they ask for feedback, and how do they make it a little bit more normal in their teams? And so I think as you're thinking about how do you shift the culture, really beware of thinking that it's just the skills. The skills are important, but it needs to be a lot more than that as well. The first thing that we did with our participants is ask them to define feedback. Well, after we asked them what they wanted to get out of it, was how do you define feedback? And it seems like a really weird and academic thing to do, but one of the reasons is that how you define the feedback will influence the way that you use it, how you feel about it, and the culture that it forms within your team and across your organization. So if we're just to pull out a couple of these examples, so if we start maybe at the bottom left, that says feedback is critical, positive, negative, and opinions. That is a very different way to someone who the top in the middle are talking about collaboration might respond to what feedback is. And so it's really interesting. We will talk a little bit more about how we have defined feedback, but this is a really useful conversation to have in your teams. If someone thinks that feedback is a reaction, as opposed to a relationship, there's going to be a different way that each of those parties engage with feedback, how they seek it, how they respond to it. And so even this as a conversation is a really useful thing for you to do in your teams.
And building on what Keegan has said, it really does set the tone for what happens next as to how you define feedback and how well it's going to work. Feedback is on a bit of a continuum, certainly between me and Keegan. So I'm on the side of that which does not kill us serves to make us stronger. I'm a bit terrified of the word feedback. When it comes to Keegan, he says feedback is the breakfast of champions. So it's probably worth reflecting on where you sit on this continuum. And that might give you an idea as to how it impacts how you go around and talk about it. So have a think about that as we go on to the next slide.
So one of the things that I'm fond of saying to people when I'm working with them around how to develop a feedback culture in their teams is this, that feedback has a brand problem. And when I think about that, there's one particular story that jumps to mind based on my own experience. I was staying at a hotel in Melbourne a few years ago for work, and I said to the person behind the desk, "Hey, you look like you're in charge. Can I give you some feedback?" And at that point, she came from behind the desk and she sort of assumed this kind of a position. You know how martial artists are trained to take punches and to take a hit to the gut? She kind of assumed this position. She put her hands behind her back and I could almost feel her tensing up. At that point, I said, "Oh, look, by the time I arrived here in my taxi late on the first evening, by the time I had paid for the cab, someone had got my luggage out of the boot. And by the time that I got to reception, someone already had my keys ready and you guys had just anticipated all my needs, and I rattled off a whole bunch of other things that I was really impressed by throughout my stay." And you could almost see this relief from her that in her mind, feedback was what you tell someone when they've done something wrong about how bad a job they have done. And it taught me a lesson as well, because I sit on this continuum where feedback's great and I welcome and I'm open to feedback. I can assume that other people have that, and it's quite often not the case. And I've used little tricks like, instead of saying feedback and using the word feedback, say, "Hey, can I share some of the things I think you did really well? Can I tell you what I've noticed? Do you mind if I share what I saw here? I think this might help." It's all the same thing in my mind, but it's a different, it changes the way it was received. And so this brand problem is something that's prevalent. A lot of people do experience this. They have this sense. And so what we do is when we say, "Can I give you some feedback?" people jump into a defensive position in their mind, and defensiveness kills the effectiveness of feedback. It just doesn't end up making a difference because people are trying to figure out or justify why the behaviors happened rather than being open to thinking about how they might be able to improve as a result of the feedback.
In order for us today to have a shared understanding of what we mean when we say feedback, we thought we'd propose a definition, which is this: feedback is information that helps improve performance.
And that may or may not be similar to your definition, but if this is the definition that you are using, what we've noticed is that it shifts both the way that you give and receive feedback. So when I'm giving feedback and I'm thinking, well, it needs to be information that helps improve the other person's performance, I need to deliver it in a way that's not just about me being right, but it's also about it being useful for the other person, acknowledging that it's possible to be technically correct and useless. And it also impacts the way that I receive feedback. So I can get feedback from a lot of different information, a lot of different sources, not just formal critique processes, not just formal reviews, but I can get it from lots of people at lots of time. And my job when I'm receiving it is to try and identify the information that is going to help me improve my performance. So as part of the feedback from our experience, in delivering this case study to the participants at Domain, we noticed probably the one big thing was the value of real play, not role play. So giving people the opportunity to really explore their own experiences, go and try a few things out in the real world, as opposed to playing purely theoretically and just in hypothetical scenarios. So we really valued, and the participants really valued, the real play as opposed to role play. And the themes that emerged were ask, do, and be. You'll notice that as we go through the presentation, and we'll remind you again of that at the end, but it was about asking for feedback, how you can better seek feedback and the importance of that. The doing was actually going away and putting this stuff into practice and getting used to, sort of almost, we called it getting into the feedback gym, going and doing some reps. And being is a reflection of the fact that the skills are important, but how you turn up in each of these conversations is so important. How you turn up for feedback and the relationship that you have with the other team members makes a huge difference to how effective and the quality of the feedback culture that you have. And so along the lines of how you turn up in conversations, we were really strongly influenced, and we shared this quote from Brene Brown. Many of you will be familiar with Brene Brown's work, and this particular one is talking about how if you demonstrate that you are willing to receive feedback, that you're still learning about this and you're still trying to get better at things yourself, it actually means that people are more willing to receive feedback from you as well. And so the importance of how you receive and how you seek feedback is a really important factor. And probably another thread of Brene Brown's work is the idea that links courage and vulnerability, that feedback is not about being right, but so often it's about sharing your concerns, sharing what you're not good at, sharing some of the struggles that you've had, and being able to deliver that with empathy and the relationship that is built up. And that does take courage. It's not often what we are taught to do. We're taught to be right and we're taught to be strong when we're delivering these things. But can we be courageous by showing some vulnerability when we're delivering feedback? And the importance of that and the relationship is something that we touched on. And I think something that came up throughout the sessions that we had.
We really noticed this as the case study proceeded through the 3 sessions, and when the groups returned to share, there was vulnerability within that sharing as well. So it's actually quite powerful when you tap into it.
Most feedback training focuses on how to deliver feedback, and we took, based on this idea that the relationship is so important to how feedback is delivered, and that if you're getting pummeled yourself, it's more likely that your feedback will be received well. We kind of flipped the script a little bit and decided this is how we will recommend that you develop a feedback culture. First, to seek. So go and ask for feedback and work on that. To receive feedback without becoming defensive and noticing what comes up when you do receive feedback that you may not like, and what's that like. And that allows you to deliver feedback from a much more empathetic position and deliver it in a way that's more likely to be received and useful and applied.
And we thought it best to take an approach that helps people match their personal styles to giving feedback. So we call it a smorgasbord approach or a buffet. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but I think it might be Smorgasbord. So it's important to find out what your personal style is when you're delivering feedback. Otherwise, you're just following a tool that doesn't feel natural. So we'll just share these with you now.
Well, the first framework that we shared with the participants was Radical Candor. It's from a book of the same name by Kim Scott. And it talks about, as you can see, on 2 dimensions. Firstly, that you care personally about the people that you're sharing information with, and you challenge directly. And so when you have that, you have a culture of radical candor where people are able to give and receive information, and you can help them improve rapidly. And if any of those things are absent, then you get either ruinous empathy, so you care but you don't challenge directly, you get ruinous empathy, or you're challenging directly but don't care personally, and you end up with obnoxious aggression. And so certainly hope there's no manipulative insincerity around, but I guess it's also always good to know. And the participants really like this framework. I think in the candid nature of its language, it's kind of very accessible language, and it's an easy one to get your head around. One of the bits of conversation that did come up was this idea that feedback always has to be challenging. So this idea that challenging directly is the important part. And so we had a discussion about maybe changing that to sharing directly, or speaking directly, as opposed to challenging directly. But again, it's the process and the conversation of exploring what this means and how that came about. And that was one of the frameworks that really resonated with people.
And of course, Keegan and I would use a framework that shows a coaching approach given our backgrounds. And the reason I like this is that starting with a question instead of giving feedback that you're thinking can be quite powerful. So I can give an example of once I was on leave for about 5 weeks. So I came back to work, and the project that I thought would be signed, sealed and delivered was floundering. And maybe because I was relaxed after being on holiday, I took a breath and sat down with the team and asked them how they were all feeling about where they were at. And we ended up having a constructive conversation about what wasn't working. And then from there, we were able to figure out a path to change and get the thing delivered, albeit a bit late, but in a lot better shape. So simply starting with a question and listening can be a very powerful thing. This model, it's about asking questions and listening properly. Not fake listening and not offering advice, but what kind of question can we start with? It's a good idea not to start with why, because why puts people on the defensive. You might try something with what's the main challenge you're facing at the moment, or what are you finding difficult today? Asking a question empowers the person. So they're not receiving information that they might find negative. They're actually being given an opportunity to have a think and respond. And you might even think about finishing on a question, which again allows that person to think about what they'll do next. So the thing about a coaching approach is it's very much a forward thinking thing rather than looking back and fixing. So it can be very powerful.
The third framework that we shared with participants was this SBI-BI model, which comes from the Center for Creative Leadership in the US. And this is very much a framework about how to deliver feedback. And so it talks about this is a good way to deliver feedback, and it follows a particular sequence, and it is about making sure that you are delivering information that is useful for other people. So for example, we could talk about yesterday in a meeting. So Sarah, yesterday in our team meeting, you turned up 10 minutes late and unprepared. And what that meant was that we weren't able to start on time, and we didn't achieve what we hoped to in the meeting. The alternative behavior is then that next time, can you please make sure that you're on time and you're prepared, or at least you let us know that you're not going to be there so we can move on without you, so that we are able to make the best use of the time that we have there. So hopefully you were able to follow that situation, behavior, impact, the alternative behavior, alternative impact. And I can just as easily say, using that same framework, deliver some positive feedback. So Sarah, yesterday in that team meeting, you turned up on time and well prepared. And what we're able to do is get a whole lot of, it made the most of that time that we had together. And so I'd love if you keep on doing that, and maybe even share the process that you did with the other team members, so that we can always have much better meetings and that are more productive. And so that's a bit of the mechanics of delivering feedback. But one of the things that people like about this one is that it can be used. It doesn't have to be about, I have to have one for positive and one for constructive feedback. You can always make sure you're using this and use it as a bit of a checklist. And it helps it to be more useful information for the other person. So the specificity, rather than saying, oh, that meeting yesterday was good, we're able to go into a bit more specific details, and then people actually do something about that.
Specific is good. This is why this model is good, because you know specifically what you were doing, whether it was positive or constructive feedback. I can remember once someone gave me a drive-by bit of feedback, which was great presentation, Sarah, and then they left, and I'm like, what was good about it? Because I don't know what to repeat and what to not repeat. What if I repeat the bit of that presentation that wasn't actually that good? So what specifically did I do well is really important to know.
The final framework that we shared with people was one that came directly from our Masters of Business Coaching around this idea of dialogue. And that comes from William Isaac's book called Dialogue and the Art of Thinking Together. And it talks about an initial choice. The first choice that we have is whether we suspend or defend the position that we enter this conversation with. So am I open to thinking about what the other person is going to think about, or am I really just going to have my view presented and hope that that is the one that becomes the winner? And even then, again, within defending, it's sort of how hard are we likely to defend this position? So if we go really hard, we'll enter into a debate. So you can, the classic politicians are great at this. They have a point of view, and that is what they are going to stick to. They are not really interested in what the other person has to say. They'll talk over the top of each other. They're just trying to win and get their point across. The other way, which happens a little bit more when we're defending our position or defending our point of view, is a skilled conversation. It's a little bit like a tennis match, where this is where a lot of us, myself included, spend most of our conversations. That well, I'll wait for you to finish talking and I'll respectfully listen to what you've said. And then when it's my turn, I'll present my point of view. And we'll just exchange views. There's an exchange of views there. And I can sort of even respect what you think. That's great. But I'm not really changing my own perspective. And the third type is, once we've suspended our own view, is actually trying to make sense of this and think together and come up with something that maybe neither of us actually entered this conversation believing, but we realize when we look at this thing in a different way, we might be able to come up with a different perspective. And that idea of dialogue takes a lot of effort and there's a lot of skill involved, but you can see how it's a different way of delivering feedback. Not that I might not even be right about this. I'm just sharing what I've noticed, and I'm open to the fact that maybe your perspective on this situation might be different, and we might be able to emerge with something that is different and better on the other side.
I overtly tried this approach with people before and actually said I'd like for us to think together, because I don't know what the outcome is, but I know that between the two of us, we'll figure this out. And it has actually been quite powerful.
And so one of the things that our participants noticed was that this idea of dialogue and thinking together was sort of like a creative approach to feedback, where they didn't have to enter the conversation knowing that they were right and delivering the right information, but they were entering in a bit more of a vulnerable way and a bit more of a way where they were interested in both parties' views, that we might be able to come up with something different and better. And this whole creative ways is why we have design and delivery teams, I guess, that we're better together. And this idea, as much as we can, having those conversations that are more dialogue than debate, and keeping that in the back of our mind as we deliver and exchange feedback.
So it might seem that there has been a random selection of frameworks that we've shared with you that are based on feedback, but there are some very strong themes coming through that we've noticed, and it really does sit around having a good conversation with someone. It's about two people being present. It's not about a power struggle. It's about self-awareness. It's about empathy, and it's about good listening. All things that are really important for feedback.
And it reminds me of a quote from Dr. Michael Kavanagh, who is at the Coaching Psychology Unit at the University of Sydney. And he talks about the quality of the conversation determines the quality of the relationships, and the quality of the relationships determines the quality of the organizational system, or for our purposes, the quality of the team. And so really focusing on having high quality conversations where people can really exchange information and get useful information that they can apply is so beneficial for our teams. And it goes beyond just the transaction of a particular task, but these are, when we're delivering feedback in a great way, we're being vulnerable, we're actually strengthening the relationships, and we're building the strength of the overall team. And I think it's a really useful thing to be aiming for, to improving the quality of the conversations that we have across our teams.
After we ran the case study, we asked people what had been the most significant change for them. But before we get into that, one of the most unexpected findings was that what the group got out from being together over the course of 3 sessions with practical experience between the sessions, we actually, it was almost, I won't say it was like group therapy, but it kind of was. People were talking about their experiences, sharing how things were, being vulnerable, and probably sharing a lot more than we expected. And so it was almost like group coaching as part of the feedback events. And, you know, if I had a recommendation coming out of this case study, it would be to create a space where people can group together and talk about their experiences.
Yeah, and I think the other thing was that people really appreciated the opportunity to have an explicit conversation about this. A lot of people struggle with either giving or receiving feedback, and they really value the opportunity to have that conversation, to be able to, in that safe space, as Sarah mentions, to be able to explore this and see what it means, to go and take some things for a spin, see what worked for them, to share with other people and hear from other people what worked for them. I think was some of the feedback that we got. And then, as you can see from some of their feedback, it was going and doing it. It was making it real and putting this into practice that made the difference for them, that they really enjoyed, that they felt was the most significant shift for them.
So for our key recommendations, based on our experiences, it comes back to the ask, do, be statements that we mentioned earlier. So asking for feedback when you need it in the moment. Don't wait for your quarterly or annual review to get your feedback, not knowing how you're traveling. Best off say, how did I go then? Was that presentation okay? Did it meet your needs? Or maybe even thinking about, what would you like to see from me in the next quarter? Thinking about being specific when you're asking for feedback and thinking about the future as well as the past.
The second recommendation that we have is about actually doing this and giving people the opportunity to go and build their feedback muscles, that they go and put this into practice, that they go and learn for themselves, and they go and apply it in their context. By giving people a range of options, what we found is that people liked to pick and choose bits of each of them. So, okay, maybe I'm going to use the SBI framework, but with a dialogue approach, or I'm going to use some of these coaching questions to apply some of this radical candor. And those were the kind of things that we noticed, and people felt much more like it was their own rather than they were being told, and they were sort of ticking a box with that. And so being able to go out and give that opportunity, the space for people to go and practice it was really a helpful thing that came from this process.
And being, so how you are when you're giving your feedback and the relationship you have with the person is a good indicator of how well the feedback's going to be taken. So there's no such thing as quality feedback when you're getting it from someone you don't trust. That's a quote from Ed Batista. In short, don't be an asshole. Build positive relationships with your co-workers so that you are in a position to give and receive feedback in an open and vulnerable way.
Yeah, I think much like it is with being a leader or being a coach, how you turn up in the conversations and how you are being is so much more important than many of us realize. And so when we're thinking about this, how do we turn up in order for this to be a quality conversation is probably the primary consideration. And then the tools and the skills and the frameworks that we apply are secondary to that. Yeah, as Sarah says, clunkily delivered feedback from someone that you really trust and you think has your best interest at heart, you're going to be far more effective than technically correct feedback from someone that you don't trust. So we would love to keep this conversation going. There are a few ways that you can do that. We will share a few resources with you, and you can dive into a little bit of this stuff yourself. You can connect with Sarah or I on LinkedIn and Twitter. For Sarah, I'm not so social. And you can join our workshop. So we are running a workshop. I'm going to give you, again, a little bit of a taster of actually what our case study participants went through, and dive into this a little bit more, and you'll walk away with even more practical applications and ways to improve the feedback culture in your teams as well.
Thanks for listening, and we would love to hear your feedback and hear how you're going with feedback too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to keeping in touch.